Dr. Merrick dropped the patient chart onto the nurse's station counter with a loud crack that made 3 people flinch. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He already knew who was standing there. Cale, his voice carried the particular kind of contempt that men like him had spent years perfecting. I don't know who hired you or what nursing school scraped you off their waiting list, but I need a competent nurse in Bay 4, not a ghost who jumps every time someone raises their voice. He finally looked up, eyes flat and cold. Go fetch linens. At least try to be useful. Nobody said a word. The entire night shift held its breath, and Rowan Cale simply nodded, picked up the chart he had thrown and walked away without a tremor in her hands. Nobody in that hospital knew why. Not yet. If this story already has you gripping your seat, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single moment. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning of the night that changed everything. The Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, ran a different kind of quiet after midnight. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the held breath kind, the kind that came from fluorescent lights that hummed a little too loud from the distant beep of monitors that never fully went silent from staff who had learned to move through the building, like water finding the lowest path, making no unnecessary sound, drawing no unnecessary attention. Rowan Cale had worked the graveyard shift for 14 months. She had chosen it deliberately, the way a person chooses a seat in the back of a restaurant with their back to the wall and a clear line to the door. The night shift asked fewer questions. The night shift had fewer witnesses. The night shift suited her in ways she never explained to anyone because the explanation would have required telling the truth about who she was, and Rowan Cale had not told anyone the truth about herself in a very long time. She was 30 years old and looked younger, which people interpreted as inexperience. She was quiet, which people interpreted as timidity. She moved with an unhurried precision that her colleagues found strange, the way she never bumped into anything, never dropped anything, never reacted to a sudden noise, the way normal people did with a jolt and a hand to the chest. Instead, she would simply turn her head, assess, and return to what she was doing. Her supervisor, nurse manager Patricia Holt, had once described her in an evaluation as calm to the point of clinical. She meant it as a criticism. Rowan had read it and almost smiled. She was tripling down on a medication reconciliation chart for a post-op veteran in room 412 when she heard Dr. Merrick coming down the hall before she saw him. She recognized his footsteps, that aggressive heel-first strike that announced his arrival the way a ship announces itself with a foghorn. She did not look up from the chart. Cale, he stopped at the edge of the nurse's station. I submitted a consult request for the Admiral's room 3 hours ago. 3 hours. Where is the updated medication log? Rowan set down her pen. I sent it to your tablet at 11:47, Dr. Merrick. If you'd like, I can resend it. I don't need you to resend it. I need it to have been there when I asked for it. He leaned against the counter. How long have you been here? A year and a half, and you still can't manage basic administrative timing. From 2 stations down, charge nurse Danny Reyes looked up and then immediately looked back down at his paperwork. He had learned, as they all had, that intervening only made it worse. Rowan met Merrick's eyes with a steadiness that had made more than one person uncomfortable. I'll flag it as urgent next time, she said. So it hits the top of your queue first. Merrick studied her for a moment, looking for the flinch that wasn't coming. He always looked for it. He never found it. That fact, more than anything else, seemed to genuinely bother him. He pushed off the counter with a short, dismissive sound and walked away. Danny waited until the footsteps faded. You okay? Fine, Rowan said and picked up her pen. One of these days you're going to have to tell me how you do that. She wrote 2 more lines in the chart before answering. Do what? Not react. The man spoke to you like you were furniture, and you looked at him like you were doing long division. Rowan thought about that. I was, she said. I was calculating how many times I've heard that tone before, and what the probability was that anything I said would change it. She turned a page. 0. So I saved the energy. Danny let out a breath that was half a laugh. I need to learn that. Takes practice, she said, and she did not tell him what kind. Admiral Raymond Briggs was in room 418, which was at the end of the secure corridor on the 4th floor. He was 63 years old, had 2 stents in his left coronary artery, and had been admitted 4 days ago after what the official record listed as a cardiac event secondary to elevated stress. What the official record did not list was what had caused the elevated stress, because that information lived in a classification tier that most people in the building didn't have the clearance to know existed. Rowan knew it existed. She didn't have the clearance either. Not anymore. But she had spent enough years moving through environments where classified information pressed against the walls like water pressure that she could feel its shape even when she couldn't see it. Admiral Briggs had not had a casual cardiac event. Something had happened, and someone somewhere was very unhappy about it. She had filed that observation into a corner of her mind labeled "Things I Notice But Do Not Pursue," and she had gone back to her charts. At 12:41 in the morning, she was in the supply room at the end of the East Corridor, conducting inventory, a task that Merrick had reassigned to her 3 days ago as a form of punishment for something she had done that he couldn't actually criticize clinically, so he'd invented an administrative failure instead. She was counting IV bags with the methodical patience of someone who had once counted ammunition in the dark by feel in a tent in a country whose name she was not permitted to say out loud in civilian company. That was when she heard the first anomaly. It wasn't a gunshot, it wasn't a shout. It was a sound that most people would have registered as nothing. A subtle shift in the building's ambient noise, a change in the rhythm of footsteps somewhere below her, a quality of movement that didn't match the pattern of a hospital at 1 in the morning. The elevator had opened and closed twice in 4 minutes on the ground floor, which she could hear through the ventilation shaft above her head. Delivery personnel didn't come at 1 a.m. Visiting hours had ended at 8. The EER was on the opposite side of the building. She set down the inventory clipboard. She stood very still for 11 seconds, which she later would not be able to explain to anyone in a way that made sense, except that she was listening to the building the way she had once listened to a tree line, and the building was telling her something was wrong. She walked back to the nurse's station. Danny was on the phone, half turned away, one hand pressing the receiver tighter against his ear. When she came around the corner, he held up a finger, the universal 1 second, and then his expression changed in a way that made her stop moving entirely. He lowered the phone slowly. He didn't hang it up. He just lowered it. "Danny," her voice was low and even, "talk to me." He stopped, started again. "Security desk, ground floor." He swallowed. "They said," his voice dropped to a pitch she'd never heard from him before. "They said someone bypassed the external access panel on the ambulance bay. 3 vehicles came in. The security supervisor tried to approach them and..." He stopped again. "And what?" He's not responding on the radio. The entire corridor seemed to inhale and hold it. Rowan moved to the window at the end of the hall. She didn't look at the street. She looked at the reflection in the glass, the angles, the geometry of the hallway behind her, the position of the stairwell door, the distance to the elevator bank. She was running numbers that had nothing to do with patient dosages. "Rowan," Danny had come up behind her. "What do we do? Do we call the police? Do we..." "Yes," she said. "You call, right now. Use your personal cell, not the hospital line. Call 911. Tell them Naval Medical Center, Bethesda, possible security breach, armed personnel, suspected, request immediate response." She turned to face him. "Then you get every patient on this floor who can be moved into the interior rooms away from the windows. You close all the corridor doors, and you stay away from the elevators." Danny stared at her. "How do you know they're armed?" "I don't," she said. "I'm assuming, because whoever bypassed a federal facility's external security panel and disabled a security supervisor at 1 in the morning did not come here to deliver sandwiches." She looked at him. "Go." He went. She went the other direction. The 4th floor had 2 stairwells, one at the east end of the corridor, one at the west near the secure wing where the Admiral was housed. She took the east stairwell door open, slowly standing to the side of the frame, listening. Footsteps below her. 3rd floor. Moving up, but not fast, a deliberate, controlled ascent. More than 2 people. She counted the sound pattern of 4 sets of feet, possibly 5, and they were moving with the spacing discipline of people who had trained together. She let the stairwell door close without a sound. In the 14 months she had worked this shift, Rowan had kept exactly 1 personal item in her locker, a change of clothes, civilian shoes, and a small medical kit that was more comprehensive than anything the hospital issued. containing items that required explanation to have if anyone ever looked closely. No one had ever looked closely. No one had ever thought to look. She went to her locker. She opened it. She looked at the medical kit for a moment, and then at herself in the small magnetic mirror she had stuck to the inside of the door, and she had a conversation with her own reflection that lasted no words and about 3 seconds. Then she took the kit, closed the locker, and moved. The secure corridor leading to room 418 had a keycard checkpoint and a single security officer posted at the junction. When Rowan rounded the corner at a controlled walk, Officer Terrence Webb had his hand already on his radio, and his face had the particular expression of a man who had received news he did not fully understand, but whose body already knew was bad. "Miss Cale, you need to go back to—" "How many people does the Admiral have with him right now?" she asked, not breaking stride. "Ma'am, I need you to—" "Officer Webb." She stopped 2 feet in front of him, and her voice did something that it almost never did. It dropped to a frequency that was not loud, but was somehow difficult to ignore, the way a cello note underneath an orchestra isn't the loudest sound in the room, but is the one your chest feels. "I need you to answer the question, because in approximately 2 minutes people are coming up that stairwell, and I need to know what we have in that room." Webb stared at her. Something about her stillness was rearranging his assumptions in real time. "2 agents," he said. "And Sergeant Callum, SEAL team. He's the primary protection detail." "Any weapons in the room beyond personal sidearms?" Webbu's hand tightened on his radio. "Who are you, Tekbam?" "Someone trying to keep the Admiral alive," she said. "Which is what you want too, right?" "A beat, a long one. Yes, ma'am." "Then let me through." He stepped aside. Room 418 was small by the standards of what it contained. Admiral Raymond Briggs was propped up in the hospital bed at a 30-degree angle oxygen monitor on his finger, reading glasses on a briefing binder open in his lap. He looked up when the door opened, and the 2 agents in the corners of the room moved like shadows, hands inside their jackets. In the chair by the window, Sergeant First Class Marcus Callum had been sitting with the particular stillness of a man who was present in every corner of himself. He was built like a question mark in reverse, all forward lean and purpose. He stood the moment Rowan walked in, not in alarm, but in assessment, the way a trained person stands to get a better read on a variable. "Who are you?" one of the agents said. "I'm the nurse assigned to this corridor," Rowan said, "and you have a problem." She looked at Callum because he was the one whose body language told her the most. He was already calculating. "Stairwell east and possibly west. Armed team minimum 4 moving up from the 3rd floor. They bypassed external security. The security supervisor on the ground floor is down." Callum's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes clicked into focus with an almost audible precision. "How do you know it's the stairwell?" "Because the elevators are too obvious, and they're not amateurs." One of the agents was already on his radio. The other had moved to flank the door. Callum was looking at Rowan with the expression of a man recalculating something he thought he had already figured out. "You're the nurse," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." "You counted their footsteps through a stairwell door and assessed their tactical formation from the sound pattern." "I estimated," she said. "I could be wrong about the number, but not about the formation." She met his eyes and said nothing, which was, she understood, the moment it happened itself an answer. Admiral Briggs had lowered his briefing binder. He was watching her with the focused attention of a man who had spent 4 decades reading rooms for a living. "Young lady," he said, "I have a feeling this is going to be a very long night." "Yes, sir," she said. "I believe it is." And then the fire alarm went off, not the slow cycling wail of a drill, but the sharp emergency activation pattern triggered from a manual pull station, and every door on the 4th floor hissed open on its automated safety release, and the sound of footsteps in the east stairwell stopped being distant. They were on the floor. The 2 agents posted to the Admiral's room moved immediately, one to the door, one repositioning behind the bed. Callum moved to the window, not to look out, but to cut off the angle from it. Rowan moved to a position she had not consciously chosen so much as found herself occupying the place in the room where she could see the door, the window, the bed, and both agents simultaneously with a clear path to the medical cart in the corner. Old habits. The first sound from the corridor was not a gunshot. It was a voicemail controlled with the cadence of someone reading from a memorized script, the voice of a man who had done this before and wanted everyone to know it. Attention all hospital personnel. This is a security exercise. All staff are to remain in position and not attempt to use communication devices. Anyone found in the corridors will be escorted to a designated holding area. Cooperation is encouraged. Danny's voice from somewhere down the corridor. That is not, you are not. Then a crash. Something heavy and then nothing from Danny. Rowan's jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch. Holding area, one of the agents muttered. Right. Callum turned from the window. He looked at Rowan with the particular evaluating look of someone who had served alongside enough different kinds of people to recognize when someone in civilian clothing was not entirely civilian. You know any way out of this room that isn't the door or the window? No, she said, but I know how this building is laid out better than they do because I've been here 14 months and they've been here 4 minutes. That's the advantage. That's not much of an advantage. It's the only one we have, she said, so we use it. The agent at the door said quietly, 2 in the hall, moving toward us, another 2 hanging back at the stairwell junction. Rear guard, Callum said, which means someone's coming up the west stairwell too, Rowan said. They'll try to seal both ends of the corridor simultaneously. Callum looked at her again. This time he didn't say anything. He just gave a single small nod, the kind that meant he was updating his evaluation of her, though he had not yet decided where to file the update. Admiral Briggs said from the bed with the tone of a man who had survived 40 years of dangerous situations by being very good at asking the right question at the right time. Can someone tell me who they're here for? Because if it's me, that changes our options considerably. Everyone in the room looked at him. He looked back. I have enemies, he said without any apparent distress. I've always had enemies. The question is which ones found me here and what they think they can accomplish before the cavalry arrives. How long until cavalry arrives? One of the agents said into his radio. Static. Then 12 minutes minimum, possibly 18. They've got units on the other side of the city. 18 minutes. Rowan looked at the medical cart in the corner. She looked at the door. She looked at Callum, who was looking at her, and she made a decision in the space between 2 heartbeats that would unravel everything she had spent 14 months trying to keep quiet. Move the Admiral to the bathroom, she said. Interior wall. No windows, highest structural protection in the room. You 2 cover the door. Sergeant, you're with me. The agents exchanged a look. Callum didn't exchange a look with anyone. He just said, what's your plan? The west stairwell exits 2 doors down from here. If we can hold this corridor long enough to funnel them back into the stairwell, we buy the Admiral time and we cut their approach angles to 1. She looked at him steadily. I need you to trust me for approximately 30 seconds before you start asking me how I know any of this. He studied her for 3 of those seconds. Then, you've got 30. They moved. What happened next in the corridor of the 4th floor of the Naval Medical Center at Bethesda would later be described in 3 separate incident reports, 2 agent debriefings in 1 classified addendum, and none of those documents would fully agree on the sequence because the people writing them were trying to explain something that did not fit neatly into the available vocabulary. What they agreed on was this: the nurse from the night shift moved through that corridor like someone for whom hallways full of threat were not a new experience. She didn't run. She didn't freeze. She moved with an economy of motion that was recognizable to anyone who had ever trained for close quarters engagement, staying to the non-dominant side of angles, using doorways correctly, keeping her silhouette out of sight lines. When the first of the armed men came around the east junction and raised his weapon, Rowan Cale was not where he expected her to be. She was 6 feet to his left in moving, and what she did in the next 4 seconds was efficient and quiet and deeply, deeply incongruent with 14 months of night shifts and medication charts. The man went down. He was alive. He would be sore for a considerable time. Callum, 2 steps behind her, said nothing for a moment. Then, 30 seconds is up. I know, she said. Who are you? From the far end of the corridor, a second figure appeared, and Rowan pulled Callum sideways into an alcove as a burst of fire tore through the space they'd been standing in half a beat before, and she pressed her back against the wall with her heart doing exactly what a trained heart does, under fire rate elevated, not racing, controlled acceleration rather than panic. The difference between a sprinting engine and a blown one. Later, she said. I'll explain later. You'll explain now, he said, and his voice was very quiet and very serious. Because I need to know what you're actually capable of before I let you do anything else in this building. She turned and looked at him in the dim light of the alcove, and for the first time in 14 months of careful performance, the performance slipped. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. I'm a nurse, she said, and I'm also, she stopped, started again. I was a special operations medic, Delta attachment, 8 years. She watched his face. I left, and I came here, and I haven't been anything else since I walked through that door 14 months ago, and I need you to understand that I am trying very hard to be a nurse right now, and not the other thing, but there are armed men in this building, and the Admiral is 18 minutes from reinforcement, and I don't have the luxury of pretending. Callum was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, Delta. Yes. What was your designation? She held his gaze. The Viper. He looked at her for a long time, and whatever Sergeant First Class Marcus Callum had been expecting from the quiet, unassuming night shift nurse who had never once raised her voice at Dr. Merrick's contempt, it was not that. It was genuinely, thoroughly not that. Okay, he said finally with a breath that carried 14 kinds of recalibration in it. Okay, what do you need? Down the corridor, the sound of boots on tile was getting louder. The fire alarm was still screaming overhead. Somewhere on a lower floor, a patient was calling for a nurse, and no one was coming, and that fact sat in Rowan's chest like a coal she was not allowed to drop. I need you to cover the West Junction, she said, and I need access to that crash cart 2 doors down. Because Callum, there's going to be someone on our side who gets hit before this is over, and when that happens, I need to be ready. He moved without another word. And Rowan Cale, former Sergeant First Class Delta Force Attachment, 8 years of operational medicine in theaters whose names were still classified the woman her unit had called the Viper, for her ability to keep people alive when every variable said they shouldn't be rolled up the sleeves of her nursing scrubs and went to work. This was the night her quiet was going to cost her everything. This was the night she stopped hiding. The crash cart was exactly where Rowan had memorized it being, because she had memorized everything about this floor the first week she worked it, not because she was paranoid, she had told herself at the time, but because good nurses knew their environment. That was what she had told herself. She had believed it mostly. The part of her that was still honest knew she had mapped every corridor, every supply closet, every stairwell exit, and structural load-bearing wall, because some parts of a person don't switch off just because you hand in your military ID and sign a civilian employment contract. She got her hands on the crash cart at the same moment she heard the shot. It was a single round suppressed but not silent from the west end of the corridor, the direction she had sent Callum, and the sound of it went through her like a current, not fear exactly, but that sharp, clarifying thing that lives just on the other side of fear, the thing that used to switch on in her the moment an operation stopped being theoretical and became real. She moved toward the sound. Callum was down on one knee at the West Junction, one hand pressed against his left side, the other still holding his weapon-level barrel pointed at the far end of the hall, where a figure had retreated back behind the corner. His jaw was set in a hard line. His breathing was controlled the way trained people breathe when they are in pain, and choosing not to let it make decisions for them. How bad, she said, crouching beside him. Through and through, I think. His voice was steady, but she could hear what it was costing him. Caught the edge. She pulled his hand away from the wound without asking permission, pressed 2 fingers against it, and assessed in the time it took most people to decide whether to look. Entry-exit lateral abdominal wall missed the vital structures, or he wouldn't be upright and talking. Significant blood loss coming, not immediate catastrophic loss. He had time. Not a lot of it, but enough. I can stabilize this, she said. You're going to need a real OR later, but you won't bleed out in the next 20 minutes if I work on you now. Later, he said, right now I need to be able to shoot. You can do both. She was already pulling from the kit she'd brought from her locker, and the contents of it made him glance sideways at her with the evaluating look she was getting used to seeing on his face. Hold still. What is that kit? Something I put together myself. Nurses don't put together kits like that. No, she agreed, packing the wound with the efficiency of someone who had done it in worse conditions than a hospital corridor. They don't. He hissed once short and sharp, and then went back to watching the far corner while she worked on him. And down the corridor behind them, She could hear the two agents' voices, terse clipped exchanges, and the sound of the Admiral's room door being reinforced. Somewhere below them, an alarm she didn't recognize was sounding different from the fire alarm lower and more insistent. Someone on a lower floor had triggered another system. The building was waking up to what was happening inside it, and that meant the people inside it were also waking up. "They're going to push again," Callum said. "The guy I hit, he went back to the stairwell. He's going to regroup, and they're going to push harder." "How many did you see?" "3 on the west side, 2 more coming up behind them." "So there are at least 9 in the building." "At least." He looked at her sideways again, that measuring look. "For someone who works the night shift and manages medication logs, you're doing a lot of tactical math very quickly." "I told you," she said, finishing the pressure dressing and pressing his hand back over it. "Hold this. Firm pressure constant. Don't let up." "You told me Delta." 8 years. He shifted his weight, resettled his weapon. "What theater?" "All of them," she said, "at various points." "And then he stopped. Something crossed his face that wasn't skepticism exactly. It was something more complicated than that. "You walked away from it and came here. Graveyard shift." "Yes?" "Why?" She stood up back against the wall, looking down the west corridor. "Because I was very good at keeping people alive in places where everything was trying to kill them," she said. "And I needed to try doing it somewhere quieter for a while." He processed that. "Then how's that working out for you?" She almost smiled. "Ask me in 19 minutes. The second push came 90 seconds later. They came around the west corner with more aggression than the first approach, 2 men moving fast, covering each other, tactical and practiced. Rowan saw the geometry of it the moment they appeared, the angle of approach, the spacing between them, the way the front man's weapon was indexed slightly left, which meant he was right-eye dominant, and covering his natural blind side, which meant his right side was the exposure. She didn't carry a weapon. She had not carried a weapon in 14 months, and she had been deliberate about that, in the same way she'd been deliberate about every other choice she'd made since leaving, because weapons had a gravity to them, and she had not trusted herself not to fall back into that gravity if she let it get close. But Callum had a secondary sidearm holstered at his ankle, and she had seen it when she was working on his wound, and now he looked at her, and she looked at the holster, and some kind of understanding passed between them that didn't need words. "Take it," he said. She crouched, drew the weapon in one smooth motion, checked the chamber in a half second, and stood up. The motion was so clean, so absent of hesitation that Callum watched it happen, and his expression did the thing it kept doing, recalibrating, filing away, updating the assessment. "You check that chamber like you've done it 10,000 times, he said. "More," she said simply. The 2 men had covered half the corridor. Rowan tracked them past the door frame, timed the moment the lead man committed to his line of approach, and stepped into the corridor for exactly 1 second. Long enough to put a shot precisely at the lead man's gun hand, disarming not killing, which took a level of precision under pressure that most people at a firing range couldn't manage with all the time in the world. The gun hit the floor. The man clutched his hand and went down to his knees, not incapacitated, but removed from the equation. His partner froze for the fraction of a second that a trained person froze when something happened that their preparation had not accounted for. Callum used that fraction. His shot caught the second man in the shoulder, non-lethal, decisive. Both men were on the floor. Not dead. Rowan had been deliberate about that too. Callum stared at the corridor. Then he looked at her. "You put a round through a moving target's gun hand from 40 feet in a hallway with 1 second of exposure." "I had a good angle." "That is not an angle thing. That is a..." He stopped, shook his head once the gesture of a man surrendering an argument to the evidence. "Okay, I'm done asking questions for right now." "Appreciate it," she said. She moved to the 2 downed men, secured their weapons, and was back in 15 seconds. Somewhere in that motion, she had also assessed the wounds on both of them, noted they were stable, and made a mental notation that they would need attention before the end of the night that had nothing to do with whether she felt sympathy for them. She did not feel sympathy for them, but she was a medical professional, and the 2 things had learned to coexist in her with a clarity that would have taken a therapist several years to unpack. From the east end of the corridor, one of the agent's voices carried to them. Agent Briggs, the taller one whose name she'd caught in the room. "We've got movement in the east stairwell again. Multiple contacts." "How many?" Callum called back. "At least 3. They're regrouping." Rowan did the math. 2 down on the west side, 2 down earlier on the east. That left a minimum of 5 still active, possibly more if her original count had been low. And they were regrouping rather than retreating, which meant they hadn't been deterred. They were recalibrating their approach, which meant someone was giving them orders in real time and that someone had planned for resistance. This was not a target of opportunity. This was a prepared operation, and someone on the outside was running it. She turned that thought over twice and then filed it under things I tell someone with more authority than me the moment this is over. Callum, she said. Who knew the Admiral was here? Specifically, who knew the room number, the floor, the exact security configuration? He looked at her. That's a very specific question. It's the right one. They went straight to the 4th floor. They didn't sweep other floors first. They didn't waste time searching. They came here because they knew exactly where he was. She kept her voice level. That's not intelligence gathered from outside. That's intelligence from inside. The silence that followed had a different quality than the other silences of the evening. This one landed heavier. You're saying someone told them, he said. I'm saying it's the only explanation that fits the pattern. She looked at him. Which means there may be someone in this building who is not what they appear to be. Which, given the present situation, I appreciate the irony of. He almost laughed. It came out as a short exhale through his nose, the kind of almost laugh that people produce when something is genuinely darkly funny, and this is completely the wrong time for it. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I appreciate that too. From room 418, the Admiral's voice calm and carrying. Sergeant Callum, status report. Working on it, sir, Callum called back. I'd like to be informed rather than managed if it's all the same to you. Yes, sir. Rowan moved to the door of 418, pushed it open, and looked at Admiral Briggs, who was sitting on the edge of the bed now. Not lying down, not folded into the bathroom as she'd directed, sitting on the edge with his feet on the floor and his briefing binder still in his lap because apparently being in the middle of an armed incursion was not sufficient reason for Raymond Briggs to stop reading his briefings. Admiral, she said, I asked you to go to the bathroom. And I chose not to, he said. Tell me what's happening. 9 or more armed men in the building, trained coordinated with prior intelligence on your exact location. We've neutralized 4, 5 or more regrouping. Reinforcement, ETA. She looked at her watch. 12 minutes, possibly less. He studied her the way he'd been studying her since she walked through his door, that focused analytical attention that had helped him navigate intelligence operations for 4 decades. You were military. It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. Yes, sir. I thought so, he said. The first time you walked into my room 3 nights ago, routine vitals check, I thought so. She paused. You noticed. I notice things, he said. It's what I do. He set the briefing binder aside. What do you need from me? Stay in this room. Stay low. If the door comes open without warning, get behind the bed, not the bathroom. The bathroom door is hollow core and provides no real cover. The bed frame is metal and will stop around. She said it the way she said everything without flourish, which was perhaps why he received it without argument. Understood. He looked at her steadily. Who are you? My name is Rowan Cale. I'm a nurse. And before that, a beat. The Viper, she said quietly. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but recognition, the way a man looks when a piece of information he had filed away years ago suddenly becomes immediately relevant. His eyes sharpened. Delta. Yes, sir. I've read reports about that designation, he said slowly. Field medical record that... He stopped. You should have a commendation with your name on it in a file somewhere that most people in this building don't have the clearance to see. Possibly, she said. I wouldn't know. You walked away. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm glad you're here tonight. So am I, she said. And she meant it in a way that surprised her because for 14 months, she had been telling herself that being here, being the nurse, being the person who filed charts and absorbed contempt and never raised her voice, that was the right choice, the only choice, the one she had made deliberately and with full understanding of what she was giving up. And standing in this room with Callum bleeding in the corridor and weapons in both hands and a tactical problem unfolding in real time around her, she understood that some part of her had been waiting, not wanting this, but waiting for it the way a held note waits for resolution. She went back to the corridor. Danny Reyes was there. She had not heard him coming, and that fact alone told her something was wrong with her attention, because Danny did not move quietly and she should have heard him. He was pressed against the wall 20 feet from the nurse's station, one hand holding a compress against a cut above his eyebrow that was leaking steadily down the side of his face, his eyes wide and moving, his breath coming in the short, uneven pattern of someone in shock who had not yet identified themselves as being in shock. Danny. She moved to him immediately, hands on his face, assessing the cut, scalp laceration, significant bleeding. But scalp lacerations always bled dramatically, not dangerous, not deep. Look at me. You're okay. They hit me with the radio, he said, the one who was calling it a security exercise when I told him it wasn't he, just... His voice cracked. There are 3 of them at the nurses' station, Rowan. They've got 2 of the other nurses, Gretchen and Park, they're holding them at the station, and they have guns, and I don't... He swallowed hard. I don't know what to do. She kept her hands on his face until his breathing slowed by 1 notch. You did the right thing. You got clear, and you found help. She looked him over. Can you walk by him? Yes. Then I need you to go to the supply room at the east end of this corridor and stay there. There's a phone in their landline. It's a direct internal line. Call down to the security desk, tell them the nurse's station on 4 is compromised. 2 hostages, 3 armed men, and you need them to relay that to the arriving units outside. She squeezed his arm once. Can you do that? Yes. He straightened slightly. Then he looked at her hands, at the weapon she was carrying, at the quality of stillness she moved through, and something in his expression rearranged itself the way it did when a person understood that the thing they thought was true was only part of the picture. Rowan, who are you? Someone who is going to get Gretchen and Park back, she said. Go. He went. The nurse's station was 50 feet down the main corridor, an open area with low countertop barriers on 3 sides and no structural cover worth mentioning. 3 armed men in that space, 2 hostages, and an open sight line for 30 feet in each direction. It was a bad setup for a rescue and a good setup for exactly what it was being used for, a control point. They had taken the station because it gave them visibility down both corridor wings and communication access to the rest of the floor. Someone was thinking tactically. Someone who understood hospital layouts. She went back to Callum. He had moved to a better position against the east wall, still maintaining pressure on his wound, still watching his sector. His color was not good, but his eyes were clear. Nurse's station, she said. 3 men, 2 hostages. It's a control point. They're not just here for the Admiral, they're holding the floor. He processed that quickly, which means the play isn't just extraction. They want something from him. Information. They need him alive and cooperative. Which buys us time. Some, he agreed, not a lot. He shifted, winced, controlled it. The East group is still building. I can't hear them in the stairwell. They were waiting for a signal. They're waiting to hear from the control point, Rowan said. The nurse's station is command and control for whoever is running this. If we cut off that communication, we disrupt their coordination, Callum finished. But 3 men open position, 2 hostages. He looked at her. That's not a good equation. No, she said, but I know something they don't. What's that? She looked down the corridor toward the nurse's station, visible at the far end, the glow of the monitors still running the silhouettes of the armed men moving against them. I know which floor panels squeak and which ones don't, she said. I know where the motion sensor on the east corridor is mounted and what its blind angle is. I know that the cabinet behind the station desk is stocked with IV bags, which will stop a round from a 9mm at close range. She paused. I've had 14 months to learn this building. They had 14 minutes. Callum looked at her for a long moment. The Viper, Gimt, he said quietly, not mocking, not even evaluating anymore, just acknowledging. Like a man reading a name on a memorial wall he'd heard of before and was only now seeing in person. I need 2 things from you, she said. Your radio so I can coordinate with the agents in the room. And 3 minutes. He unclipped his radio and handed it over without asking what she was planning to do with 3 minutes, which told her more than anything else that had happened tonight that he had made his decision about her, and the decision was trust. She took the radio. She moved. The floor panels in the 4th floor east corridor were original 1980s installation and anyone who had walked that corridor 300 times in soft-soled nursing shoes knew that the section between door markings 406 and 408 had a resonance issue, a hollow underneath, that transmitted footfall vibration in a way that was audible from 15 feet away if the ambient noise was low. The fire alarm had stopped 8 minutes ago. The ambient noise was low. She went down the west side. The nurse's station was laid out with 3 approach angles: east corridor, west corridor, and the central hub. The men had positioned themselves to cover east and west. Nobody covers the hub approach when you own the hub. It was a predictable oversight that came from assuming the threat would come from the direction it was supposed to come from. Rowan came from the direction it was not supposed to come from. The first man saw her when she was 6 feet away. He started to raise his weapon and she was already moving inside his reach before the barrel came level, and what happened next was fast and quiet and left him on the floor with a concussion he would not remember acquiring. Gretchen Park, the night shift phlebotomist, 24 years old, who had once told Rowan she was thinking about going back to school for nursing, let out a sound that was half sob and half relief from her position crouched behind the counter. Nurse Ji-young Park, who shared a surname with no relation, was beside her, one hand over her mouth, eyes enormous. "Get down," Rowan said to them, low and even. "Stay down. Do not move until I tell you." The second man had heard something and was turning. She was already moving. He was bigger than the first, faster in his reaction, and he managed to get a grip on her before she could create the distance she needed, which put them in a tight grapple behind the nurse's station with 2 terrified women on the floor between them and the third man somewhere around the near corner. She used the fact of his hands being occupied to drive her elbow into a pressure point below his ear that had a very reliable neurological effect on people who had not been trained to resist it. He went down. The third man came around the corner at a run and stopped. Because Rowan was standing in the center of the nurse's station with a weapon leveled at him and nothing in her posture that suggested any degree of uncertainty about what she would do with it. He stopped breathing for a moment. Then, "You're the nurse," he said, and the disbelief in his voice was almost comical. "Yes," she said, "put it down." He didn't put it down immediately. He had the look of a man running calculations, her angle, his distance, the hostages, the exits. She watched him run them. She had already run them herself and knew what the outcome was going to be. "You're thinking the woman can't be as good as she looks," she said. "You're thinking you've got a half-second window if you commit fast enough." She kept her voice level and conversational, which was somehow more frightening than if she had shouted. "I promise you the math doesn't work. Put the weapon down." He put it down. Behind her, the radio crackled. Callum's voice, "East stairwell is moving. They're coming up. 30 seconds. She looked at the man in front of her, gestured him to the floor, zip-tied his wrists with the restraints from the medical kit she had no conventional explanation for carrying, and picked up his radio. Static. Then a voice she hadn't heard before, different from the man in the corridor, deeper with a quality of cold control in it that she recognized the way you recognize a sound you've only heard once but that your body cataloged permanently. "Station 4 report." She pressed the transmit button. "Station 4 is clear," she said, pitching her voice down just enough to be unclear through radio compression. "All clear." A pause. It lasted 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than it should have if someone actually believed her. "Confirm your identifier," the voice said. She clicked off transmit. 20 seconds to the east stairwell. She looked at Gretchen and Ji-young on the floor. "Can you run?" "Yes," Ji-young said immediately. "Then run. West stairwell, down 2 floors, find any locked room and stay in it." She was already moving toward the east corridor. "Go, now!" They ran. She went the other direction. Callum was at the east junction when she got there, on one knee, weapon up, watching the stairwell door. His face had the gray undertone of blood loss fighting itself against adrenaline, and she hated the math of that, the way the body could sustain almost anything for a while. And then the while ended without warning. "You got the station," he said. It wasn't a question. She had answered the radio from there. "I got the station." "How many left?" "1 confirmed down in there, 2 secured, plus the 4 from earlier. That's 6. She settled beside him against the wall, which leaves a minimum of 3 in that stairwell. "And whoever is running this operation from outside," he said. The voice on the radio. "Yes." "You heard him." "Yes." "You know who it is." She was quiet for 1 second. One single second, and in it, something moved across her face that she did not have the right name for, because she had spent 8 years filing things into categories with clean operational labels. And this one didn't have a clean label. It had a face and a name and a history she had not thought about in 14 months because she had been very carefully, very deliberately not thinking about it. I might, she said. I'm not certain. Callum looked at her. The Viper, he said. Did you leave Delta because of this operation? This operation didn't exist 14 months ago. But whoever is running it, did you leave because of him? The stairwell door handle moved. Later, she said and brought her weapon up. The door came open hard and fast, a dynamic entry, the way people trained to push through resistance. And Rowan was already positioned for it already inside the angle of the swing, already moving. In the next 40 seconds on the 4th floor of the Naval Medical Center at Bethesda were the 40 seconds that would end up in the classified addendum that most people in the building would never be permitted to read. What the record would confirm was that when the reinforcement units arrived at 11 minutes faster than the estimated 18 because a security analyst 2 miles away had flagged the hospital's internal alarm pattern and escalated immediately, they found the east corridors secured 4 additional subjects, zip-tied or incapacitated, a SEAL sergeant with a through-and-through abdominal wound who was nevertheless standing upright and providing clear tactical information to the arriving unit commander, and one night shift nurse standing in the center of the 4th floor corridor with her arms at her sides and a calm on her face that several people would describe later as the most unsettling thing they had seen that night. But the operation wasn't over, because the voice on the radio had not been among the men they'd brought down, and Rowan Cale was the only person in the building who understood exactly what that meant. The unit commander's name was Captain Dara Osi, and she had the kind of face that processed information without broadcasting it, absorbing filing, moving. She came through the east stairwell with 6 men at her back and took exactly 4 seconds to assess the 4th floor before she found Rowan and stopped. "You're the nurse," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Osi looked at the zip-tied subjects on the floor, the secured corridor, Callum standing upright against the wall with a field dressing on his side that was too precise and too effective to have been self-applied. She looked at Rowan's hands, the borrowed sidearm, the quality of stillness. She did not look confused. She looked like a woman updating a file very quickly. "Briggs is secure. In his room, uninjured." Rowan lowered the weapon, cleared it, held it grip first toward Callum's agent, who was moving up the corridor. 6 subjects down on this floor. I believe the operation commander is still outside the building. He was running coordination through a radio network. I intercepted one transmission from the nurse's station, but he'll know by now that something went wrong. How will he know? Because his people stopped reporting in. She paused. And because whoever gave him the Admiral's location, room number, and security configuration is still in this building. That person will have found a way to communicate. Osei was still for 1 second. It was the stillness of a very competent person absorbing a very significant piece of information. "You're saying we have an insider." "I'm saying the tactical profile of this operation requires it. They move too fast and too precisely for externally gathered intelligence. Someone who has access to patient security configurations, someone with authorization to know which room, which floor, which shift rotation fed them that information." Osei turned to the agent nearest her. "Lock down all communication devices on this floor. No one uses a personal cell or hospital line until I say otherwise." She looked back at Rowan. "Who are you?" Actual answer. Callum answered from the wall before Rowan could decide how to. "She's the reason the Admiral is alive, Captain. Everything else is a longer conversation." Osei looked at him, looked at Rowan, made a decision the way competent people make decisions quickly based on available evidence, with the understanding that the decision could be revised later if the evidence changed. "Fine, we'll have that conversation. But right now, I need you to walk me through what you know about the commander outside." Rowan looked at her steadily. "There's a man who goes by the operational call sign Roar, Victor Roar. He ran a covert extraction unit under a defense contractor umbrella that had its authorization quietly pulled about 16 months ago after a series of operations that went significantly outside their mandate." She said it the way she said everything, without ornament, without hesitation, each word placed where it needed to be. "I know his voice. I heard it on the radio. I'm confident the identification is accurate. Osei's expression shifted fractionally. You know him personally. We operated in overlapping theaters, Rowan said. We crossed paths. That's a very careful way of saying something. Yes, Rowan said. It is. Callum pushed himself off the wall slowly with the careful movement of a man managing significant pain without advertising it. Captain, Roar didn't pull his people out when reinforcements arrived. A standard operation, you lose contact with your forward team cavalry, shows up, you extract and regroup. He hasn't extracted. He looked at Rowan, and in the look was a question he was handing her rather than asking outright. She took it. He's still running the operation, she said, which means he has a secondary access point we haven't identified and a secondary objective that he believes he can still complete. What secondary objective? Osei said. Not the Admiral, Rowan said. He has what he needed from the Admiral. The location, the operation, whatever intelligence he came here to demonstrate access to, that's already accomplished. The raid itself was the message. She paused. He came here for something else. Someone else. The corridor was quiet in the way that silence gets heavy when everyone in it understands the weight of what's been said and nobody moves to set it down. Osei said you. Rowan didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She said, I need to know the building's external access points. Every one of them. Loading dock maintenance corridors, utility tunnels, all of it. I can get the facility schematics. I don't need schematics, Rowan said. I know the building. I need someone to tell me which external sensors are currently showing anomalies because he's already inside the perimeter again. He never fully left. Osei stared at her. How do you know that? Because he's Victor Roar, she said, and she said it with a flatness that carried more weight than volume. He doesn't run operations from outside. He finishes them from inside. The radio on Osei's belt crackled before she could respond. The voice that came through was not from any of her people. It was calm, deep, measured, the voice Rowan had heard through the nurse's station radio 40 minutes ago, and it landed on her. Now the way it had landed then, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of something she had been carrying like a stone in her chest since she first heard it. Captain Osei. The voice knew her name. That fact alone shifted the temperature in the corridor by several degrees. I want to commend your response time. 11 minutes is genuinely impressive. I had planned for 14. A pause. I'm going to need you to ask your night shift nurse to come to the parking structure. Level B2. She knows why. If she doesn't come in the next 10 minutes, I'll be significantly less patient with the two individuals I'm currently holding company with. Osei's hand was on the radio. She looked at Rowan. Rowan's face had done something that Callum, watching her from 10 feet away, would later describe to the debrief team as the most controlled reaction to a threat he had ever observed, not because she showed nothing, but because what she showed was not fear. It was the thing on the other side of fear that only existed in people who had been afraid enough times that the fear had been metabolized into something more functional. It was clarity, cold, absolute working clarity. Who does he have? She said. Osei pressed transmit. Identify the individuals. A pause. Then a nurse manager, Patricia Holt, and a physician, goes by Merrick. He's been quite vocal about his displeasure, which has made him somewhat tiresome, but he's physically intact. Danny's voice from somewhere down the corridor, he had come out of the supply room when the reinforcements arrived, said, "Oh no," quietly, like a prayer going in the wrong direction. Merrick, who had spent 14 months treating Rowan as though she was something scraped off the bottom of a problem he hadn't wanted in the first place, who had thrown charts and used his voice as a weapon and never once imagined in all of those 14 months that the woman absorbing his contempt was the most dangerous person in the building. Rowan's jaw tightened by a fraction. Then it released. She looked at Osei. He's going to use them to bring me down to B2, where the sightlines favor him and my support structure is diminished. The parking structure has 3 vehicle exits, 2 stairwell accesses, and a maintenance tunnel that connects to the facility's eastern utility corridor. She said it without inflection. It's a good choice. It's where I would have picked. Osei studied her. You're not going. I'm going, Rowan said. It's not a discussion, Captain. I'm going because if I don't go, he hurts them. And then he waits, and then he asks again, And the calculus doesn't improve with time. She looked at Osei squarely. But I'm not going alone, and I'm not going on his terms. I need 4 minutes, and I need someone to listen carefully. Osei looked at Callum. Callum said from the wall with the authority of a man who had been shot tonight and was still standing and therefore had earned the right to an opinion, listen to her. Osei listened. What Rowan laid out in the next 4 minutes was not a plan in the conventional sense. It was a sequence of conditional actions built on a set of predictions about how Victor Rohr moved, how he thought, and how he had always in every operation she had known him to conduct structured his exit. She spoke quickly and without repetition, and Osei's people absorbed it with the focus of professionals who understood that the time for questions was after the briefing, not during. When she finished, Osei said, "How certain are you about his positioning 70%, about his behavior once I'm in the room with him 90? Why 90? Because I know what he wants from this conversation," she said, "and it's not what he told you it was." She did not explain that further. Not then. She moved. The service elevator on the west side of the building took her to B1, which was one level above her destination, and she walked the maintenance corridor from there, the one that ran parallel to the main parking structure, and connected through a utility door that most hospital employees didn't know existed because it was marked as an electrical access panel and the handle was recessed. Rowan had found it on her 3rd week of night shifts during a 3 a.m. facilities walk she had taken for no particular reason she had been willing to examine honestly. She paused at the utility door. On the other side of it was Victor Rohr and the 2 people he was using as the price of admission to this conversation, and a reckoning she had been telling herself for 14 months was not coming. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed. In for 4 counts, hold for 4. Out for 4, the reset pattern she had used 100 times in 100 locations that were worse than this, technically, in terms of the material threat. This one was not worse materially. It was worse in the particular specific way that things are worse when they are personal, and she was honest enough with herself in this moment to acknowledge that. Victor Rohr was personal. She had left Delta 8 years deep into a career that had been exceptional by any standard the military applied to such things. She had left because of a mission, and the mission had a name she didn't say out loud anymore, and Rohr had been the architect of it, and the mission had done something to 3 people she had been trying to keep alive, and she had kept 2 of them alive and lost the 3rd. And the reason she had lost the 3rd was not the enemy. It was the plan, and the plan had come from Rohr. She had filed a report. The report had disappeared into the classification system and never emerged. Rohr had continued operating for 16 more months before his authorization was pulled, and by that time Rowan had already handed in her ID and signed a civilian employment contract and chosen the night shift at Bethesda because it was far from everything she had been, and she needed distance badly enough that she had mistaken distance for healing. She pulled the door open. B2 was a low-ceiling, poorly lit space with a particular echo quality of poured concrete that turned sounds strange and directional. She didn't need good light. She had walked parking structures in no light by feel and memory in conditions that made this look like a comfortable afternoon. He was at the center support column, 30 feet in the way she'd calculated central position sight lines to all stairwell accesses, his back physically covered by the column. He was holding a small device in his right hand that she recognized by its profile as a remote detonator, which was a complication she had not failed to account for but had hoped not to encounter. Patricia Holt and Dr. Merrick were seated on the floor to his left wrists, bound Patricia with the contained stillness of a woman who had decided the best thing she could do was not panic Merrick with the expression of a man who had been stripped of every mechanism of control he possessed and was discovering what remained underneath, which appeared to be mostly terror and something that looked from a distance like shame. Rohr himself looked exactly the way he had always looked in the 14 months she'd spent not thinking about him. Mid-50s compact, the kind of physical presence that didn't announce itself and didn't need to, with gray at his temples and eyes that registered the world with a quality of evaluation that never entirely stopped. He had been good at what he did. That was the worst part in some ways. He had been genuinely operationally good, and the thing that had broken in him was not competence. It was something quieter than that, Something about the particular calibration of what he was willing to do to achieve what he decided was necessary. Rowan, he said, like she was a colleague he was meeting for coffee. She stopped at the edge of what she'd estimated as his optimal engagement range and didn't move any closer. Victor, you came alone. You asked me to come alone. I asked you to come. I didn't actually specify alone. He tilted his head fractionally. Are you alone? I'm the only one in this room, she said, which was entirely true. A pause. He processed that. He was good at detecting the shape of what people were leaving out of sentences, but so was she. You look different, he said. Less, he paused. You look softer. I'm a nurse, she said. I reconcile medication charts and absorb abuse from senior physicians. It changes a person. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Victor Rohr's smiles had always occupied a category adjacent to actual warmth without quite arriving there. I heard about that. The physician, Merrick. He glanced at Merrick briefly with the kind of complete disinterest a person shows toward furniture. I understand he's been quite unpleasant to you. From the floor, Merrick said in a voice that had lost most of its register, what is happening? Neither Rowan nor Rohr acknowledged him. Why the Admiral, she said. Access, Rohr said simply. His medical records. His communication logs from the past 18 months. There's information in this building's systems that belongs to an ongoing operation that I have an interest in completing, and Admiral Briggs's hospitalization provided a window. He said it without apology, without the performance of justification. Just operational fact. The medical record system has interfaces to communication archives that most people don't know are linked. You'd need someone with facility-level access to navigate it. The insider, she said. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't need to. The insider pulled what you needed, she said. The raid was cover, loud, dramatic design to pull every security asset to the 4th floor, while someone with the authorization was in the system 3 floors below. She felt the shape of it as she said it, the elegance of it, in the way that operationally efficient things had a terrible elegance to them. You already have what you came for. Yes, he said. So why are we still here? He looked at her steadily. Because I wanted to see you, he said, and because I want you to understand something. Patricia Holt on the floor had been watching the exchange with the intense focus of a woman who was trying to understand the geography of the situation she was in. Merrick had gone quiet in the way people went quiet when they understood that the dynamics of a room had nothing to do with them. Rowan kept her attention on Rohr's right hand, on the detonator, on the radius of his motion if he shifted his weight. She was running 4 calculations simultaneously, which was exactly as many as the situation required. Then say it, she said. You filed a report, he said, after Kandahar, about my planning decisions, about what you believed were the deficiencies in the operation protocol that cost Sergeant Delray his life. The name landed in the room like something thrown from a height. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 14 months. She had heard it daily in the part of her mind. She had closed the door on the way you close a door on a room where something happened, and you tell yourself that closed doors mean distance, and discover over time that you were wrong about that. I filed the report, she said. Her voice was level. Yes, the report was accurate, he said. She went very still. The planning deficiencies you identified were real, he said in that same uninflected operational tone. The risk assessment I submitted was flawed. I knew it when I submitted it, and I submitted it anyway because the intelligence window was closing, and I made a judgment call that the intelligence was worth the risk margin. He paused. I was wrong. The concrete space held the words. Patricia was holding her breath. Even Merrick had stopped making sound. Rowan looked at Victor Rohr, and she understood that she was not prepared for this, that in all of the scenarios she had constructed across 14 months of night shifts and medication charts, and Dr. Merrick's contempt and deliberate, careful quiet, she had not constructed the scenario where he said this. Where he said it simply and directly, and with the particular flatness of someone who was not performing contrition, but was stating a fact they had already processed and accepted and were now presenting as data. That doesn't give you the right to be here, she said. Her voice had gone lower, not louder. Lower the way a sound goes when it's coming from somewhere deep and load-bearing. That doesn't make any of this acceptable. No, he agreed, it doesn't. Then why are you telling me? Because you've been punishing yourself for 14 months for a mission failure that was my operational error, he said. And I needed you to hear that from me directly, before someone eventually sends you back into the field, which they will. Because people like you don't stay behind medication carts forever. He looked at her steadily. You didn't lose Delray, I did. From above them through the concrete transmitted through structure, she felt more than heard the movement of Osei's people repositioning. The perimeter was tightening. Roar would know it too. He had always known when the walls were closing. His hand shifted on the detonator, and she tensed by half a degree, but he didn't arm it. He held it up, thumb visibly off the trigger, and set it down on the hood of the nearest vehicle. I'm not going to blow anything up, he said. That was leverage. You knew it was leverage. I know you knew. He looked at her. I need you to let me walk out of here. I can't do that. You could, he said. You're choosing not to, which is different. Yes, she said. It is. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had expected the answer and respected it. Then here's what I can offer you in exchange for what I know you're about to do. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly with deliberate telegraphing and removed a drive, small matte black, the kind of thing that could be a USB, or could be nothing, and could be everything. He set it next to the detonator. The Insider. His name is on that drive. Everything he pulled from Briggs's systems tonight copied before it was transmitted. Evidence sufficient for prosecution. He stepped back. Call it a professional courtesy. Rowan looked at the drawer. She looked at Roar. She thought about Sergeant Delray, who had been 28 years old and from Baton Rouge, and who had known 3 card tricks and done them badly and badly and badly until you saw the 4th one, which was extraordinary. And she had never told anyone that about him because it was hers, and she had not been willing to share it with anyone who might handle it carelessly. Hands, she said. He put them up. She crossed the distance between them, took the drive, secured the detonator, and put her weapon against his back, and said very quietly into the space between his shoulder blades, You should have filed the corrected report yourself. I know, he said. I needed to hear you say that. I know that too, he said. It's why I said it. She walked him toward the stairwell, and from above came the sound of boots and the clean metallic sounds of a perimeter closing, and Patricia Holt stood up from the floor and Merrick stood up from the floor, and the two of them looked at Rowan, really looked at her with expressions that had no language attached to them yet because the language for what they had watched happen in this parking structure hadn't been invented yet in the vocabulary of a hospital night shift. Merrick said in a voice scraped down to something much smaller than his usual register, Rowan. She did not stop walking. Not right now, Dr. Merrick. Not right now. She kept moving. Behind her, she heard Patricia say something to Merrick in a low voice, and she heard Merrick absorb it the way a person absorbs something they have needed to hear for a long time, with a particular quality of silence that was almost physical. At the stairwell door, Osei's people were already there, weapons up, and she handed Roar over without ceremony and pressed the drive into Osei's hand and said, The Insider. Everything you need is on that. Osei looked at the drive, looked at Roar being taken into custody, looked at Rowan with an expression that had been recalibrating across the past 40 minutes and had now arrived somewhere that couldn't quite be called admiration because Osei was too professional for admiration, but was something in the same neighborhood as profound respect for a variable she had severely underestimated. The night shift nurse, she said. Yes, ma'am, Rowan said. I'm going to need a very long statement from you. I know. And I'm going to need to know your actual designation, your unit, your theater, your full operational history as it pertains to Roar in this operation. I know that too. Osei looked at her for another moment. Then, are you injured? Rowan took stock. There was a graze along her left forearm she hadn't noticed acquiring, which was bleeding slowly and it would need suturing. Her right shoulder had taken impact at some point the grapple behind the nurse's station and would be stiff tomorrow. She was operating on no sleep and high adrenaline and the specific exhausted alertness that came from a body that had been asked to be a weapon again after deciding to be something quieter. I'm a nurse, she said. I'll manage. Callum was at the top of the B2 stairwell when she came through the door. He was leaning against the wall with the deliberate stillness. of a man who had been told multiple times by multiple people to sit down and had decided that standing was a personal priority. His face was gray and determined in roughly equal measure. He looked at her, then at the arm, then at her face. He's in custody. He's in custody. And the drive, OC has it. She moved to him, looked at the dressing on his side, pressed 2 fingers against it, and assessed. Still holding. You need an OR. I'm aware, he said. The people who have been telling me that include 3 different medical professionals in the last 20 minutes. Then why are you standing in a stairwell? He looked at her with that same evaluating look, the one that had been recalibrating across the course of the entire night and had now landed somewhere settled and certain. Because I wanted to see you come back up those stairs, he said, and because I have a question. What's the question, or Delray, he said. Baton Rouge, 10th group attached to your unit for the Kandahar mission. She went still. I knew him, Callum said. Not well, but I knew him. His voice was quiet and without performance. He talked about the medic on his attachment, said she was the best he'd ever seen. He paused, said she had a nickname that scared people who didn't know her and impressed everyone who did. Rowan looked at him. Her throat did something she wasn't going to let become anything visible. He didn't die scared, Callum said, in case that's something you've been carrying. I got the full report from someone who was there. He didn't die scared. The stairwell held that for a moment. Then she nodded. Once. The way a person nods when they receive something they've needed for a long time and are not going to be able to thank anyone for adequately with words. You need that OR, she said when she trusted her voice again. Let's go. They went up the stairs together, and above them, the hospital was already beginning the work of becoming itself again. The monitors, the corridors, the careful, necessary routine of a place where people came to survive things. And on the 4th floor, in room 418, Admiral Raymond Briggs was sitting on the edge of his bed with his briefing binder closed in his lap, waiting for the nurse who had saved his life to come back and check his vitals, because some things, even on the worst nights, still needed doing. The OR team took Callum at 2:47 in the morning, and Rowan stood at the end of the corridor and watched the gurney go through the double doors and felt a particular kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep. It was the tired that came after the adrenaline finished burning and left the body to account for everything it had spent, every decision made, at speed, every calculation run on the edge of consequence. She had been running that kind of tired for 8 years before she stopped. She had almost forgotten what it felt like. She had not missed it. And yet, standing there in the corridor watching those doors swing closed, she was aware of something she was not ready to name, a quality of being fully present that she had not felt in 14 months of medication charts, in graveyard shifts, in deliberate, careful quiet. She turned around. Dr. Merrick was standing 10 feet behind her. She had not heard him approach, which meant either her attention was more depleted than she'd assessed, or he had been moving very carefully, which was not a thing she associated with him. He was still in his physician's coat, which had a tear at the left shoulder seam from when he'd been pulled to his feet in the parking structure, and his hair was disordered in a way that his hair was never disordered, and he was looking at her with an expression she had no prior data point for on his face. He opened his mouth, she waited, he closed it, then opened it again, then said, I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. He gestured vaguely at the space between them, which was not a large space geographically, but which was carrying a significant amount of history. He stopped. I owe you, yeah, he stopped again, and she could see that whatever mechanism he usually employed to occupy rooms and dominate conversations had simply gone offline, and what was left underneath was something much less armored. I treated you like you were nothing, he said, for over a year, every shift. I said things to you that I said because I could, because you never reacted, and I interpreted that as permission. His jaw worked. You never reacted because you were being kind, he said. You were being so much more than kind. He ran out of sentence. Rowan looked at him. She was tired in every layer of herself, and she did not have the resources available right now for a conversation that required delicacy, so she went with honesty instead, which was the faster route. You don't owe me an apology for tonight, she said. Tonight is a different accounting. What you did tonight, what he put you through, nobody deserves that, whatever they've done. He blinked. I'm not apologizing for tonight. I know, she said. I'm saying you don't need to include it in the weight of what you're apologizing for. They're separate. He absorbed that. What I said to you, the way I spoke to you in front of other staff, in front of patients. He pressed his lips together. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because... He stopped. Because I didn't fight back, she said. Yes. People like that, she said quietly. People who don't react, you interpreted it as weakness. Most people do. It's a reasonable misinterpretation. It wasn't weakness, he said. No, it wasn't. He looked at her steadily, and she could see in his face the particular expression of a man recalibrating an entire framework, not just the specific instances, but the structure underneath the specific instances, the architecture of assumptions that had allowed them to happen. Who were you? He said, and it came out as something very different from an accusation. It came out as genuine bewilderment. Before this, who were you? A medic, she said. A very good one in places where very good meant the difference between people living and dying. She looked at him evenly. And then someone made a decision that cost someone his life, and I couldn't fix it, and I needed to come somewhere quieter for a while. Here, he said, you came here. I came here. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry, he said, and it was the simplest, most stripped version of the sentence with nothing attached to it to cushion the landing or redirect the weight. Just that. I'm genuinely sorry, Rowan. She nodded, once. It was not forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was a slower process than one corridor conversation at 3 a.m, but it was acknowledgement. She received it. She let it register rather than deflecting it, which was its own kind of discipline. Go get your arm looked at, she said. He almost smiled. It was strange to see on his face a small, crooked thing that looked like a feature he had not used in a while. You're injured. Aware. You should go to the ER. I should, she agreed. I will. Go get your arm looked at first. I want to know you're processed and documented before I sit down. He opened his mouth to argue, understood that he was being managed with expert efficiency by someone who had been managing things all night, and closed his mouth and went. She watched him go with a feeling she could not have named that was somewhere in the neighborhood of exhausted compassion, which was the most honest version of what she had for him right now, and which she thought was given everything sufficient. Patricia Holt found her 2 minutes later. Patricia was 61 years old and had run the night shift nursing staff at this facility for 11 years, and she had what Rowan privately thought of as the quality of a very good NCO, a steady, practical, impossible to genuinely rattle, and deeply competent in the particular way that people who have been doing difficult work for a long time and doing it well become competent, which is without fanfare and without much appetite for it. She had sat on a parking structure floor for 40 minutes with her wrists zip-tied and a man with a detonator 4 feet away, and had spent the entire time watching and cataloging rather than panicking, because Patricia Holt had decided a long time ago that panic was a resource expenditure she couldn't afford. She sat down next to Rowan against the corridor wall. This was notable because Patricia Holt did not sit on corridor floors. It communicated something about the nature of the moment. I'm going to need to file approximately 40 reports by end of week, Patricia said by way of opening. I know, Rowan said. Several of them are going to involve you in ways that require you to account for a set of skills and a personal history that you did not disclose on your employment application. I know that too. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Were you ever actually in danger in the building, I mean? Did any of it actually threaten you, or were you always... I was in danger, Rowan said. The situation was genuinely dangerous. The outcomes weren't guaranteed. She paused. I just had better tools for managing uncertainty than most people in the building. Better tools? Patricia repeated in the tone of a woman processing a significant understatement. Rowan, you took down 6 armed men, coordinated a federal protection detail, neutralized a hostage situation in a parking structure, and did all of it in nursing scrubs with a borrowed sidearm and a medical kit that I am now extremely curious about. The kit is something I assembled myself, Rowan said. I can document the contents for your records. Patricia turned her head and looked at her. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, are you going to leave? The question surprised her. Not because it was unexpected. Rationally, it was the logical question. Given the night's events, given that everything she had spent 14 months keeping quiet had now been spectacularly, irrevocably unquieted. But it surprised her because of how it was asked, which was not with the detachment of a manager managing a staffing situation. It was asked with the directness of a person who would prefer an honest answer. "I don't know," Rowan said. And that was the honest answer, not a deflection, not a managed response, but the actual state of things inside her in that moment, which she was still taking inventory of. "For what it's worth," Patricia said, "and I understand it may not be worth a great deal given the context." She paused. "You are the best nurse on my floor, technically instinctively in terms of patient outcomes. I knew that within your first 3 months. I never said it to you because I was managing a physician who considered my staff his personal hierarchy, and she stopped. "I should have said it. I should have said it to you, and I should have said considerably more to Merrick, and I did neither of those things, and tonight you kept two people alive in a parking structure who did not deserve the protection as much as they received it." Rowan looked at her hands. "They deserved it the same as anyone." "They deserved it the same as anyone," Patricia agreed. "You provided it the same as anyone. That's the point." She stood up, smoothing her coat with the habitual gesture of a woman who reordered herself as a matter of professional identity. "Go to the ER, get your arm sutured. That's a direction, not a suggestion." "Yes, ma'am," Rowan said. Patricia walked away with the steadiness of a woman who had a great deal to do and had already begun the internal reorganization required to do it. Rowan watched her go and felt something shift fractionally in the architecture of the past 14 months. Not collapse, not resolve, but shift the way weight distributes differently when you remove a particular load-bearing stress. The ER physician who sutured her arm was a third-year resident named Cabrera, who had heard enough of what had happened on the fourth floor by now to approach her with a quality of careful respect that made her slightly uncomfortable because she was accustomed to being approached by ER staff as the night shift nurse from upstairs and not as something that required careful respect. "How many?" he said halfway through the suturing. "How many what stitches?" "7, she said. "Maybe 8. Don't go past 8. The tension distribution is better with 7. He looked at her over his work. "Sorry," she said, "force of habit." "You want to call it?" "No, you're doing fine." She looked away from her arm and at the curtain across the bay, which was cream-colored and institutional, and exactly what it should be, no more and no less. "7, she said again quietly. He went with 7. Captain Osei found her in the ER bay at 3:30 in the morning, which meant Osei had been running on no sleep for at minimum as long as Rowan had and showed approximately the same amount of it, which was very little. "The drive checked out," Osei said, sitting in the chair beside the bay. "The insider is a biomedical technician on the second floor. Name is Ferris. He's been in custody for 20 minutes. The data roar pulled from the Admiral's systems is recoverable. The transmission was incomplete when we locked down communications." She said it efficiently, one item after another, the way people report when they have a great deal to cover in limited time. "The Admiral has been briefed. He wants to speak with you." "I'll go up when Cabrera signs off on the arm." "He's already signed off. He was waiting to tell you until Cabrera finished because he didn't want you to leave before the suturing was complete." Osei paused. "He said, and I'm quoting directly, 'Tell her I'm pulling rank on the discharge timeline, but I'm willing to negotiate on the visit schedule.'" Rowan almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her. It came from a part of her chest that had not been accessed much in 14 months. "He's going to be fine," she said. "The Admiral." "Yes," Osei said. "Thanks to you." A pause. Osei had something else to say. Rowan could see it in the way she arranged the pause, deliberate, not hesitant. "What?" Rowan said. "Roar gave a full statement," Osei said, "voluntarily. In it, he confirmed your account of the Kandahar operation. He confirmed the planning deficiency was his. The report you filed was accurate, and the outcome was the result of an erroneous risk assessment he submitted with full knowledge of its errors." She said it without inflection, which was the professional way to deliver information this significant. "He also confirmed that your report was received classified and buried at a level above his authorization, which means someone above him made a decision about it that he did not make himself." She paused. "That's going to open an investigation." Rowan was very still. Outside the curtain, the ER moved through its night shift rhythm, Quiet voices, the roll of a supply cart, the steady beep of a monitor 2 bays over. The investigation will require your cooperation, Osei said. Your testimony, your account of the mission. I know. It will also. Osei stopped in the way people stopped when they were about to say something they knew carried weight. It will reopen your file, your service record, your operational history. It will bring attention to things you've spent the better part of a year and a half keeping quiet. I know that too, Rowan said. Are you ready for that? She thought about the question honestly, which it deserved. Was she ready? Ready was not quite the right word for what she was. Ready implied preparation, and she had not prepared for this, had deliberately not prepared, had chosen quiet and night shifts and medication charts precisely because she did not want to be prepared for this. But ready and willing were different things, and capable was different from both. I'll cooperate with the investigation, she said. Everything I know about Kandahar, everything I know about Roar, all of it. Osei nodded. There's one more thing. Rowan waited. The Ferris situation, Osei said. The biomedical technician. When we went to take him into custody, he ran. He got as far as the second-floor utility corridor before she paused. He's not a trained operative. He panicked. He ran into the utility corridor and barricaded the access door, and he has a hospital-issue fire extinguisher and apparently a significant amount of fear, and we have a hostage negotiator who is currently stuck in traffic on the Beltway. She looked at Rowan steadily. He's asking for a nurse. He said he wants to talk to a nurse, specifically not a law enforcement officer. He said, she checked her notes, which was unnecessary because she had memorized it, but the gesture gave the quote its proper weight. He said, I need someone who isn't going to shoot me. I need someone who just helps people. The ER bay was quiet. Rowan looked at Osei. He's not going to hurt himself. Unknown. He's frightened, not violent. But frightened people in enclosed spaces with the sense of no exit are unpredictable. Rowan finished. She stood up. What floor? Second, East Utility Corridor, room 2C, 2 of my officers on the door. Osei stood with her. You don't have to do this. I'm a nurse, Rowan said. He asked for a nurse. She went. The utility corridor on the second floor was narrow and smelled of cleaning solution in the particular institutional air of a building's infrastructure, the parts of a hospital that the patients never see and that keep the visible parts functioning. 2 of Osei's officers were at the door, weapons holstered, which was the right call with a non-violent, frightened person, and told her something good about Osei's judgment. She knocked on the door 3 times, deliberate, unhurried. A nurse's knock, not a law enforcement knock. The difference was in the rhythm, which communicated intent before a word was said. Silence. Then, who's there? My name is Rowan. I work the night shift on the 4th floor. Nursing staff. She kept her voice even and present, not soft in a way that felt performed, just real. I heard you wanted to talk to a nurse. A very long pause. She let it be long. You're not going to arrest me. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I carry no authority to arrest anyone. She paused. I do carry a suturing kit and a significant amount of coffee-fueled stubbornness, if that's relevant. Silence. Then from behind the door, something that might have been a very small, very miserable sound that was adjacent to a laugh. I didn't know anyone was going to get hurt, the voice said. He told me it was going to be a data poll. He said nobody would get hurt. I believe you, she said, and she meant it, which was the only reason it landed the way it did. People could hear the difference she had learned between a performed reassurance and an actual one. Can you open the door? Silence. Ferris. She said his name directly, not gently, directly, person to person. You asked for a nurse. I'm here. The only way I can help you is if you open the door. A very long pause, then the sound of a barricade being moved. Then the door opened. He was 27, which she hadn't known, and he was sitting on the floor against the far wall with the fire extinguisher beside him, and his knees up and his eyes red, and he looked at her with the expression of a person who had been terrified for so long that the terror had burned through into something hollow. She walked in. She sat on the floor across from him, which was not something she had planned. It simply seemed like the right geometry for the conversation being level, rather than standing over. The 2 officers remained outside. The door stayed open. Tell me what happened, she said. He told her. It took 12 minutes. She listened to all of it without interruption, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You're going to have to account for what you did. That's not something I can help you with in this corridor. But what I can tell you is that you opened that door, and that's the first decision you have made tonight that goes in your favor." He looked at her. "Is anybody?" He swallowed. "Is anybody dead?" "No," she said. "Injured, significantly, but alive." His shoulders dropped with the release of a weight that had been the central gravity of his entire night. He put his hands over his face and made a sound that she recognized as the sound of a person discovering they have not caused an irreversible thing and feeling the relief of it so completely that the relief itself was almost as painful as the fear had been. She stayed on the floor with him until Osei's people came in quietly and helped him to his feet, and she stayed until he was gone. And then she stood up slowly with the measured patience of a body that had given a great deal tonight and was beginning to present the invoice. Room 418 was exactly as she'd left it, with the exception that the briefing binder was now on the bedside table rather than in the Admiral's lap, and the Admiral himself was the same feet on the floor back, straight, watching the door with the focused attention of a man who had been waiting and did not find waiting particularly burdensome. "There she is," he said. She crossed the room, pulled on a fresh pair of gloves with the habitual snap of a nurse returning to work, and checked his vitals with the same meticulous attention she always brought to it, which was the same meticulous attention she brought to everything, and which had been the same regardless of whether anyone in this building had ever recognized what it meant. His pressure was slightly elevated, his pulse was steady, his oxygen was fine. "You should sleep," she said. "I'll sleep when I've said what I want to say," he said. "Sit down." Patients don't instruct nursing staff to Rowan. He said her name the way a person said a name when they were done with preamble. "Sit down." She sat. He looked at her across the small space between the chair and the bed. "I spent 30 years in intelligence," he said. "I have worked with people who operated under names that don't appear in any public record, who did things that protected this country in ways the country will never know to thank them for, and who paid prices for that work that didn't appear in any official accounting." He paused. "You are one of those people." She didn't say anything. "What you did tonight," he stopped. "What you have done consistently for 8 years and what you did here tonight, specifically, it matters. It mattered when Delray went down and you kept the rest of that unit alive. It mattered when you walked into that parking structure alone. It matters in ways that have not been said to you in a language that was adequate." He looked at her steadily. "So I'm going to say it inadequately because inadequate is better than nothing, thank you. Specifically, personally, and without qualification." Rowan looked at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady all night through all of it, and they were steady now, and she was grateful for that because if they had not been steady, she thought she might have had to account for why, and she was not ready for that accounting tonight. "You're welcome, sir," she said. It came out smaller than she intended, which was its own kind of honesty. He nodded. "Now." He leaned back against the pillows, the first concession to physical comfort she had seen from him, and picked up the briefing binder. "I'm going to read for 30 minutes, and then I am going to sleep, and you are going to go finish your shift if you're still on the clock, or you are going to go home if you're not, and tomorrow there will be an investigation and a statement and a great many uncomfortable conversations, and tonight is going to be the last night for quite some time that any of this feels manageable." He opened the binder. "So go manage the rest of it while it still feels that way." She stood. She removed her gloves. She went to the door. "Cale," he said without looking up. She stopped. "The Viper," he said in the tone of a man reading a name in a record he had had cause to look at before. "You should know that name has been spoken in rooms with a great deal of respect attached to it, by people who knew what it meant." He turned a page. "I thought you should know that." She stood at the door for a moment. Then she went back to her floor because there were patients who needed checking and monitors to be read and a medication log that had been interrupted 3 hours ago and needed completing. And the night shift at the Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, had a particular kind of quiet after all of it. Still the held breath kind, still the fluorescent, humming kind, but different now in some way that she could feel without yet being able to name. Danny Reyes was at the nurse's station when she came around the corner. He had a fresh bandage above his eyebrow and a cup of coffee that he held out toward her the moment he saw her, with the simple, uncomplicated generosity of a person offering the only thing useful they had. She took it. He looked at her for a moment. His expression was doing the same thing everyone's expressions had been doing tonight, recalibrating, updating, processing a version of Rowan Cale that did not map cleanly onto the version they had stored. But there was something in Danny's version of this that was different from the others. He knew her from 14 months of shared graveyard shifts. He knew her coffee order and which patients she checked twice when she was worried, and that she always refiled the supply cabinet alphabetically because she said it made inventory easier, but he suspected it was also just how her mind organized itself. He knew the version that everyone had seen, and he was now holding it against the version he had watched tonight, and his face was showing the particular expression of someone who understands that both versions are real and that the coexistence of them is not a contradiction. "Still on the clock," he said. "2 hours," she said. "There's a patient in 409 who keeps pulling his monitoring leads," he said. "I've repositioned them 4 times. "I'll go," she said. She went down the hall with her coffee, and behind her, Danny Reyes looked after her for a long moment, and then he went back to his charts because the night shift had work in it, regardless of what else the night had in it, and that was something Rowan had always understood better than anyone. She did not know yet what came next. She did not know whether she would stay or whether the investigation would change the shape of things in ways she couldn't predict. She did not know whether Callum would come through the OR with the same quality of steadiness he'd had in the corridor, or whether the Admiral's words in the room would turn out to be the beginning of something she hadn't anticipated when she walked through the door of this hospital 14 months ago. What she knew was that the patient in 409 had his monitoring leads pulled again, and that required immediate attention, and that immediate attention was what she was here for. She went in, she fixed it. She stayed until he was settled, and the night moved on around her the way nights do. The shift ended at 6 in the morning, and Rowan did not leave. This was not unusual. She had stayed past her shift before, held over by patient need, by paperwork, by the simple arithmetic of a floor that required more than it had. But this morning was different, and she knew it was different, and she stayed anyway because leaving felt like a decision she was not ready to make yet. Leaving meant walking out into a morning that was going to be different from every morning that had preceded it for 14 months, and she needed a few more hours inside the familiar weight of the building before she did that. Danny had clocked out at 6 with a hand on her shoulder, brief, saying nothing, saying everything, and the day shift had come on with the particular energy of people who had been briefed on the events of the night and were processing that briefing in real time, which meant they moved through the floor with a quality of charged awareness that was different from the ordinary morning handoff. They looked at her differently. She felt it without meeting their eyes, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. She finished the medication log she had started at 12:41 the previous night because it needed finishing, and because completing it felt like an act of continuity she required right now. Evidence that the ordinary things were still ordinary, that the floor still needed what floors needed, that she was still the person who made sure those things were done. She was on the last page when Captain Osei came around the corner with a second person she hadn't seen before, and the quality of Osei's stride told her this was not a routine update. The second person was a woman in her 50s, civilian clothes that were more formal than they looked, with the bearing of someone who spent a great deal of time in rooms where significant decisions were made and had learned to carry that weight without displaying it. She carried a leather portfolio under her left arm, and she looked at Rowan with an attention that was specific and prepared the way people looked at you when they had already read everything about you before walking through the door. "Rowan Cale," Osei said. "This is Deputy Director, Wren Defense Intelligence Agency." Rowan set down her pen. She did not stand up immediately because she wanted one more second of being a nurse at a nurse's station before whatever this was became the next thing. Then she stood. "Miss Cale," Wren said. Her voice was precise and unhurried. "I apologize for the hour." "I've been up all night," Rowan said. "The hour is the least of it." Something moved at the corner of Wren's mouth, not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one. "I imagine so." She glanced at Osei, a brief look that communicated a protocol, and Osei moved to the far end of the station with the tact of a professional, giving space without leaving. Wren looked back at Rowan. "I'll be direct because I understand you respond better to direct." "That's accurate," Rowan said. The investigation into the Kandahar operational report is moving faster than standard protocol would suggest, Wren said, because Rohr's voluntary statement corroborates your filing in its entirety, and because the classification decision that buried that filing has been traced to an authority level that has created significant institutional urgency. She paused. Your report did not disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because it was right, and it implicated a planning decision made by someone whose position made the implications inconvenient. Rowan was very still. Outside the station, the morning shift moved through its routines. Someone was laughing 2 rooms down. A monitor alarmed briefly and went quiet. Who? She said. That is currently the subject of active investigation, Wren said. What I can tell you is that it was not Rohr's decision. He submitted your report through proper channels. It was received, reviewed, and buried above his level and without his knowledge. She held Rowan's gaze. He didn't know it had been suppressed. Until last night, he believed the report had been received and evaluated and dismissed on its merits. Rowan processed this. She processed it with the same careful sequential attention she brought to clinical information, taking it in, checking it against what she knew and identifying where it changed the picture. What it changed was significant. Rohr had known the mission planning was flawed. Rohr had admitted the planning deficiency that cost Del Rey his life. But he had not known the report filed to account for that had been erased. He had believed wrongly, and with consequences she had been carrying for 14 months, that the institution had seen her accounting and decided it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. She sat back down, not from weakness, from the need to recalibrate in a position that was physically stable. He told me the report was accurate, she said, in the parking structure. He told me the planning error was his. Yes, Wren said, and that statement in the context of a federal investigation is going to open a chain of accountability that goes considerably higher than Victor Rohr. She sat down across from Rowan with the deliberateness of a person who understood the gravity of what they were about to say. The person who buried your report is still in a position of institutional authority. They have been in that position for 14 months. During that time, they have made decisions about operations, about personnel, about resource allocation, and the question of what else may have been managed in the same way your report was managed is now an urgent institutional question. She set the portfolio on the counter between them. Your testimony is the linchpin. Rowan looked at the portfolio, then at Wren. You didn't come here just to tell me that? No, Wren said. I came to tell you that and to ask you something. She placed her hand flat on the portfolio. The investigation is going to take time. It is going to be visible in ways that will end your ability to work this night shift in the way you've been working it. Your name, your designation, your operational history, it will move into the record in ways that won't move back out. She paused. I need to know if you understand that and if you're prepared to cooperate fully. I've already told Captain Osei I'll cooperate fully. I know, I'm asking you to tell me. Wren's voice was not unkind, but it was direct in the way that things were direct when they mattered. Because what you're agreeing to isn't just testimony. It's the end of the life you've been living for the past 14 months. And I want that to be a decision you make clearly, not one that happens to you while you're still running on adrenaline at 6 in the morning after the longest night of your recent life. The honesty of that landed differently than the procedural framing. It landed personally, and Rowan felt it as such and was grateful for it, in the way you were grateful when someone respected you enough to hand you the real weight of a thing, rather than a managed version of it. I understand what I'm agreeing to, Rowan said. I'll cooperate. Wren nodded. She opened the portfolio, produced a contact card, and slid it across the counter. I'll need a formal statement in the next 48 hours. We'll do it properly, legal representation, present controlled setting, everything documented. Not here, not today. She looked at Rowan. Go home and sleep. Whatever happens next can wait until you have slept. She stood, and then she paused, and she said something that was not in the prepared language of a deputy director conducting a preliminary interview. She said it in a different register, quietly, with the particular texture of words that came from a place of personal rather than institutional opinion. The Viper, she said. I've been in this work for 26 years. I've seen a lot of operational designations come and go. That one has a particular reputation among people who work in the spaces where reputations like that get made. She held Rowan's gaze for a moment. You should know what your work meant. Before last night. What it meant for years before last night. Then she was gone, moving down the corridor with the same measured, unhurried stride she'd arrived with, and Osei fell in beside her, and the morning shift parted around them with the instinctive deference that authority and motion produced. Rowan sat at the nurse's station for a minute and a half without moving. Then she picked up the contact card, put it in her pocket, and went to check on Callum. He was out of the OR and in recovery, which she already knew from the board, but knowing from a board and knowing from being in the room were different things, and she needed the room version. The recovery nurse, a woman named Soledad, who had been on this unit for 7 years, and who had the exact right combination of clinical precision and human warmth that recovery nursing required, looked up when she came in. He asked about you twice, Soledad said. Once in the early recovery phase, which we don't count, because that's anesthesia talking. Once about 20 minutes ago, which is real. How is he? Surgeon is pleased, through and through did what through and throughs do, clean track. No major vascular involvement, liver margin was closer than anyone liked, but intact. He's going to be sore and medically grounded for a meaningful stretch of time, which he has already indicated is going to be a problem for his schedule. Soledad raised her eyebrows in the expression of a nurse who had managed many patients' opinions about their recovery timelines. He's in Bay 3. Callum was awake. He was the particular kind of awake that came in early post-anesthesia. Everything slightly slow at the edges, the brain reassembling itself from the fog, but the core operational awareness surfacing first, because in people who had trained it long enough, that part came back before everything else. He looked at her when she pulled the curtain aside. His color was better than it had been in the stairwell, better than it had been in the parking structure, better than it had been at any point in the previous several hours, which was an extremely low bar, but the improvement was real. You're still here, he said. His voice was rougher than usual post-intubation, but the quality of it was his. I'm still on shift, she said. Then honestly, technically I've been off shift for 2 hours. I'm still here. Why? I'm not sure yet, she said. Which was also honest. He processed that. He moved as if to adjust his position, caught himself against the pain of it, and made the controlled face of a man deciding not to react to something he'd been warned about and reacted to anyway. She watched him manage it without commentary because he didn't need commentary. The operation is done, he said when he'd settled. Yes. Roar is in federal custody? Yes. The insider in custody, full cooperation apparently. She looked at his chart, the numbers, the surgeon's notes, the anesthesia record. You're going to be grounded for 8 to 12 weeks. The surgeon's note is conservative because you're a SEAL, and they're accounting for your definition of recovered being different from the clinical definition. That's fair, he said. It is, she agreed. 8 to 12 weeks is the actual number. Don't negotiate with it. A pause. He looked at her with that evaluating attention she had become familiar with across the course of the night, but there was something different in it now. Less assessment, more something else, something that took the shape of a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Ask it, she said. He looked at her. What are you going to do? She was quiet for a moment. Ren from DIAGAMA came to see me this morning. His eyebrows moved. That was fast. Yes. What did she want? Testimony, full cooperation with the investigation. She looked at his chart, not because it needed further review, but because looking at the chart was a way of organizing what she was about to say. The person who buried my Kandahar report is still active, still in a position of authority. The investigation goes high. Callum was very still in the way that trained people went still when they were processing something significant. How high? She didn't say specifically. High enough that she came herself at 6 in the morning rather than sending someone. He let out a breath. So it's not over. It's not over, she agreed. The operational part of last night, Roar the Admiral, the building that's over. The other part is just beginning. He looked at her steadily. Delray, he said. Delray, she confirmed. His family is going to be part of this investigation. They're going to want answers. She had not let herself think about that yet, which she recognized as a deliberate omission her mind had made on her behalf because thinking about it had too much mass for 6 in the morning after no sleep. She thought about it now. Michael Delray's mother, who had sent him a package every month, He was deployed, containing hot sauce and crossword puzzle books and handwritten notes on index cards. She knew this because he had told her once in the particular way soldiers told you things that mattered when they felt safe enough to say them. They deserve answers, she said. They've always deserved answers. I'm going to make sure they get them. Callum nodded once, the nod of a person who believed that and was not going to say more about it than that, because sometimes the only appropriate response to a serious thing was to receive it seriously and not add to it. What about you, he said, after the investigation, after the testimony? What do you actually do? I don't know yet, but you're not going back to the night shift and pretending last night didn't happen. No, she said, that option is gone. Good, he said with a directness that surprised her. She looked at him and he looked back without apology. I mean it. The night shift at this hospital. Rowan, you are the best field medic I have worked alongside in 12 years of active service, and I have worked alongside exceptional people. What you did last night was not the work of someone who was meant to be counting IF bags at 1 a.m. He said it without flattery, without performance, the way operational people stated facts that they had verified through direct observation. I know you needed time. I know Kandahar was, he stopped. I know what you lost. I know what the quiet cost you. But the quiet is over now, whether you chose it or not, and what comes next is going to be something more than this. She sat with that. Not fighting it, not running toward it. Just sitting with it the way she was learning to sit with the things that were true and large and not yet fully shapeable. 8 to 12 weeks, she said. Non-negotiable. He almost smiled. You're going to be a difficult person to work for. I'm a nurse, she said. I'm not going to be working for anyone. She left the recovery bay and she took the elevator up to the 4th floor, not because she had clinical reason to, but because she wanted to walk it one more time in the morning light that came through the east-facing windows, the kind of light that was nothing like the fluorescent substitute the night shift ran on. The day shift was in full rhythm now. Voices carts, the particular alive quality of a hospital in full operation, and she moved through it with the familiarity of someone who had walked this floor 300 times and who understood this morning that she was walking it differently than she ever had before. She stopped outside room 418. The Admiral's door was open. He was on the phone, briefing binder back in his lap, voice at the low register of a man discussing something that required precision. He saw her in the doorway and held up one finger, the same gesture Danny had made the previous night at the nurse's station, the universal 1 second, and she waited and he finished his call and set the phone down and looked at her. You look like a person who has not slept, he said, accurate. And you're still here. I'm going home shortly, she said. I wanted to check your chart. My chart is fine. The day shift nurse already told me. He studied her. That's not why you're here. She looked at him across the room. Deputy Director Wren came this morning. I know, I made a call at 4:30, he said without particular emphasis, the way a man mentioned having made a call. I wanted the right people moving on the right things at the right speed. She absorbed that. You made a call about me. I made a call about an investigation that has needed to happen for longer than 14 months, he said, which involves you centrally. He looked at her with the focused, specific attention she had come to understand was not his interrogating look, but his actual listening look, the one that said he was receiving what was in front of him rather than projecting onto it. Is that a problem? No, she said, and realized that she said it, that it genuinely wasn't. No, it's not a problem. Good. He settled back slightly. Sit down, Rowan. She sat. I'm going to ask you something that is outside the scope of my current role as our patient, he said, so you can refuse to engage with it if you choose. But I've found in my experience that the right question asked at the right moment is worth the risk of it being unwelcome. He paused. What do you want? Not what you're going to do for the investigation. Not what you owe to Delray's family, or to the testimony, or to the institution. What do you actually want when all of that is accounted for? She had not been asked this question in 14 months. She had not asked it of herself in 14 months, because the answer had felt like something she hadn't earned the right to want, yet something that needed to wait until the weight of what had happened was fully carried, and she had not yet determined when fully carried arrived. She thought about it honestly in the way the Admiral's directness invaded honesty. She thought about the recovery bay and Callum's 12 years of service and the way he'd said excellent people without decoration. She thought about Soledad in recovery, who had the exact right combination of clinical precision and human warmth. She thought about Danny handing her coffee at 6 in the morning without asking anything of her. She thought about Patricia's voice saying, "You are the best nurse on my floor," and how long that sentence had apparently been waiting to be said. "I want to keep doing what I do," she said. "I want to keep people alive. I want to do it in a place where the work is the right size for what I'm capable of, rather than a size I chose because it felt safe." She paused. "I want Del Rey's family to have the answers that they've waited for. I want the investigation to run its course and the accountability to go where it needs to go." She looked at him steadily. "And I want eventually, when the investigation is done and the testimony is given and the dust from last night has fully settled, I want to sleep through a night without weighing the math on every room I walk into." The Admiral was quiet. Then, "That last one may take longer than the rest." "I know," she said, "but it's what I want." He nodded. "Then we'll do the things that need doing," he said, "and we'll work toward the things that you want, in that order." He picked up the briefing binder. "Go home, Rowan. The rest of it will be here when you come back." She went. She used the east stairwell on the way out, which she had last used while listening for armed men, and she walked down 4 flights of stairs and through the lobby and out the front entrance into morning air that was cold and bright and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened inside the building behind her. Because mornings were like that, they arrived on their own schedule, regardless of what the night had contained. She stood on the steps for a moment. Her phone had 17 missed messages, which she would deal with eventually. Her left forearm had 7 sutures in a dressing that needed to be changed in 24 hours. She had a formal testimony to give in the next 48 hours and an investigation ahead of her that would move the shape of everything, and a conversation to have at some point with Del Rey's mother that she had been carrying the weight of for 14 months and now would finally properly be able to have. She also had somewhere in the deep machinery of herself a quality of stillness that was different from the stillness she had constructed across 14 months of deliberate quiet. That stillness had been a held breath, a suspension of the self pending some resolution that she hadn't been able to define. This was different. This was the stillness of a person who had exhaled, who had run everything the night had required and come through the other side, not intact in the way she'd been before. She would never be intact in that particular way again. She understood that now, but intact in a better way, in the way that was honest about what she was and what she could do and what she was willing to account for. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Callum, from the recovery bay with apparently more energy than his surgeon would have endorsed. She answered it. "You should be resting." "I should be," he agreed with a complete absence of intention to follow that recommendation. "I wanted to say something before you left the building." "I've left the building." A pause. "Then I wanted to say something before you got too far from it." His voice was rough at the edges, still carrying the remnant of the anesthesia and the night. But the core of it was the same direct, undecorated the voice of a person who said what they meant because they had learned that the cost of not saying it was sometimes permanent. "The Viper," he said. "That name meant something in every theater I operated in. It meant the person next to you was going to keep you alive when everything else was trying not to." He paused. "Last night was the first time I got to find out if the name was accurate." She was quiet on the steps in the morning cold. "It is," he said simply, in case you needed to hear it from someone who was in the room. She had needed to hear it. She had not known she needed to hear it until the moment it arrived, which was how the most necessary things worked. They were already on their way before you understood you were waiting for them. 8 to 12 weeks, she said, and then we'll discuss what comes next. "That sounds like a plan," he said. "It's a starting point," she said, "not a plan." "Good enough," he said. "Get some sleep." She hung up. She stood on the steps for one more moment, and then she walked away from the Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, into a morning that was ordinary and cold and indifferent and exactly what the world looked like when it continued as it always did, as it was always going to, regardless of what any one night had required of any one person. She had been the Viper. She had been a soldier. She had been a ghost who walked a night shift corridor absorbing contempt with her hands steady and her record clean, and 14 months of silence around her like armor she had mistaken for healing. She was Rowan Kale. She was a nurse. She was very good at keeping people alive. And beginning today, on the other side of the longest night she had spent, in a very long time, she was done pretending those three things didn't all belong to the same woman.